Sorry, a little busy here, but today I'm gonna ruin self-love. Dude, a little privacy.
I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sure it was unsettling, but you were gonna have to find out where babies come from eventually. Anyways, today's show is all about self-love, a term that I'm fairly certain originated in some kind of meditation circle on Venice Beach, right before the shoulder massage train left the station and just after the peace pipe was passed around, but that now has spread so far I recently heard a farmer in Wyoming talking about it. So you know it's mainstream, and that means it's time for me to ruin it. Now, in all sincerity, conversations about self-love have become so prevalent, mainly because it's been identified by many as a major source of suffering in people's lives. While originally in the 1950s, the term self-love had negative connotations, being related to vanity and selfishness, the term took on new meaning when people like psychologist and social philosopher Erich Fromm proposed that self-love was less about being egocentric or arrogant and more about caring for and taking responsibility for oneself. And with the rise in popularity of conversations around mental health, self-love has been at the forefront of that conversation, because it's believed that a lack of self-love means we not only have skewed and diminished beliefs about ourselves, but also hold those same beliefs about how others view us. And that all came together in a 2008 study which showed that low self-love and self-esteem can actually lead to depression, hopelessness, and even suicidal ideation. A lack of self-love can show up as people-pleasing, body shame, self-judgment, unhealthy comparison, settling for scraps, not asking for what it is you need, and maybe not even knowing what it is that you need to begin with. Constant seeking of approval and validation, not taking risks for fear of what you might look like or what people might say, not speaking your mind, not taking action, not trusting yourself, looking for something outside of us to give us answers, beating ourselves up, and an overall sense that our enoughness as a human is constantly in question. The self-criticism that comes with having a lack of self-love also releases cortisol, the body's main stress hormone, because our bodies can't tell the difference between an actual threat to life and limb, for example, and a threat to our self-concept. And so the body goes on the attack against itself, leaving us exhausted, hopeless, and with a sense of misery far more often than we'd like. Now, as is the case with every single episode of this show so far, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, there's nothing I ruin here that I haven't been on the front lines of experiencing myself. See, self-love, even if it had been a term that was popular when I was growing up, would not have been something I would say I have any real experience of. I was born into a world that was already setting me up to see my deficiencies because my father left my mom as soon as he found out she was pregnant, which means I burst onto the scene all cute, chunky, and cuddly, swaddled in a blankie that read, "Your father didn't want you." Now, of course, it wasn't until much later, once I was able to hold up my own head and walk a few steps and start formulating thoughts and opinions about my surroundings, that I realized something was different. Other families had a mommy and a daddy, but mine didn't. And since my Saturday morning cartoons didn't exactly cover topics around self-worth or self-esteem, it made me wonder why this was the case. And the conclusion that I wouldn't come to realize until much later in life is that I had created a story that I wasn't enough, and that's why he left. Then came my weight, being the husky kid in first grade to being 250 pounds at 15 years old and eventually getting up to 332 pounds. My struggles with my physical appearance, being picked on at school and never feeling like I belonged or was lovable or even had anything valuable to offer as a human, led to years of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts all the way into my 20s. What's been your experience with loving yourself or not? Feeling like you're enough or not? Dealing with the heaviness of constantly seeking approval and validation from others. It's a tough way to live, and I know what it feels like. So before we go any further, I just want to say that I absolutely acknowledge each and every one of you courageous souls who want better and know deep down you deserve better to even come here and watch this episode. That commitment to growth, even if you don't completely believe it's available for you yet, is a huge first step. I finally had my moment of clarity in 2009, which I wrote about in my book, Prison Break. And I'm so thankful and grateful that I chose to invest in myself and my happiness by working with coaches and immersing myself in the personal growth world in my late 20s to rewrite my story and start on the path of learning to love myself for the first time in my life. Now, let me say, this is not a one and done thing. There isn't some self-love button you press or a pill that you take that rewrites your DNA and wipes all self-criticism, comparisons, and shame from your mind. It is a practice, and one that must be done regularly if you want it to stick. And before any of the doing, it's important to really understand where self-love comes from in the first place. It isn't from mantras, though those can help. It isn't from healing wounds from the past, though that's a powerful thing too. And it actually isn't about developing self-love at all. It's really about a return to self-love. When I was born, even though the reality of the situation was that I didn't have a father and my nearly 9-pound birth weight may have been foreshadowing my future girthiness, I didn't experience any trauma in that. As a baby, I didn't have any mantras to make me feel enough, and I had no shame or self-judgment about my appearance, nor any comparison to the appearance of others. I want to make sure you really get that insight before I share any particular tools or practices, because otherwise we'll continue living in the illusion that something outside of us can make us whole. That our self-love practice is some kind of clever reframe or mind trick to try to get us to ignore or forget about the things we think are not enough, because that just reinforces that there's a self that can somehow be measured as more or less valuable. My friend and fellow coach, the late great Michelle Bauman, stated it perfectly when she would say, "Your worthiness cannot be put on a dimmer switch." What she was saying here is that it can't be increased or decreased by you or anyone else. The sooner we really get that truth, the more effective our self-love practices will be, because they won't be something we're doing to develop self-love, but instead to remember that we already are it to begin with. So let's talk about how you can love the absolute crap out of yourself. And CRAP is an acronym I created that covers 4 different areas we can focus on to experience more self-love, depending on what your personal go-to flavor of self-criticism is, or maybe you're like me and you know how to swirl them all together into a big old mashup of a crap sundae. First, we have the C, which stands for comparison. We waste so much time and energy comparing ourselves to others, their perceived advantages, our made-up limitations, and the constant grading of our success, our appearance, our pretty much anything against theirs. This constant need to keep up with or surpass those around us can be motivating if we look at others' accomplishments and interpret their victories as a road map of what could be possible for us, or they can be seen as a roadblock if I believe that how good or successful others are is a direct reflection of how not good I am. Look at the qualities and characteristics of the people you might typically compare yourself to, and ask yourself how you might be able to take that data, that completely unemotional information, and see if you can embody even 5% more of who they are being that allows them to experience that success. One of the most impactful things I've ever done for myself is creating a "who do I need to be" list. I now have nearly all my clients do the same exercise. When they say they have goals that involve a certain level of success with money, business, health, or relationships, I don't ask them to create a detailed 5-year plan to make that fantasy into a reality. Instead, we slow down and I ask them, who would you need to be for those things to happen? The being must come before the doing. And you know intuitively what would be on that list because you know how you show up when you're in flow, when you're at your best, when you're devoid of the stories and distractions that make you forget who you truly are. For example, on my own list, there's nothing about how much money I'll make, or how many talks or trainings I deliver, or how many books I'll sell, or how many vacations I'll take, or how much body fat I have. Instead, it has characteristics of my being, such as relaxed, enthusiastic, unattached to outcomes, courageous, and playful. I know that when I embody those qualities, which are always present, even though I don't always consciously choose them, it exponentially increases the effectiveness of any of the plans, projects, or strategies I decide to execute. Also, at an even deeper level, see if you can start to notice where you're living in the world of this versus that. That awareness alone can start bringing you back to truth and out of the comparison trap. Byron Katie says in her book, 1,000 Names for Joy, that the mind's job is to prove that what it thinks is true. And it does that by judging and comparing this to that. What good is a this to the mind if it can't prove it with a that? Without proof, how can a this or a that exist? Now, when I first read that, the insight I had was that if a picture of what I think is better than whatever I have or whatever I am didn't exist, and I had nothing to mentally compare now to, whether in my appearance, my weight, my money, my relationships, or any other area of my life, then I literally wouldn't be able to judge or reject or think that what I have in front of me isn't enough. There would be no measure to put against it, and so I would naturally love and accept it. That was freeing to me because it removes the stress and tension of living in the gap of what I think would be better than what I have now, and allows me to love what is while still being open to playing with other options to create something different, not necessarily better, just for the fun of it. And one final note on comparison is to practice dropping the misconception of who we are as being binary. In other words, if you think you either have something or don't, then the little comparison ninja who lives in our psyche will go nuts showing you how not enough you are. Start to notice that confidence or intelligence or creativity or charisma or any other quality isn't binary. It isn't on or off, yes or no, got it or don't got it, but instead is contextual. Find the places, the situations, and the scenarios where you already are or have been those things. This proves that you have access to it and that it might just be something that needs to be developed in other areas where it may be less familiar right now. Okay, next we move on to the R, which stands for responsibility, and realizing that we play a pivotal role in our experience of loving ourselves. Radical personal responsibility and self-leadership is what my book Prison Break is all about. I want to take responsibility for what I can actually contribute to practicing and experiencing more self-love, more self-compassion, more self-trust, and more self-acceptance. For me, this looks like a very intentional practice, daily whenever possible, to remind and prime myself to be in those states. To know that those states are available to me, and I'm only one thought, one choice, one moment of remembering away. Especially if this whole self-love thing is new for you, it's going to feel foreign, unfamiliar, maybe even a bit edgy. I mean, come on. If we've ever had the thought that doing something that's just for us is self-indulgent or selfish, then we're probably not going to run headfirst into a practice that's trying to shift me into making myself a priority above all else. But I really urge you to sit in the discomfort and be willing to play with some kind of practice that anchors you back into what we're talking about here. Set aside some time every morning if you can, even for just 5 or 10 minutes, and create a practice for yourself. Something you can do that gets you into the feeling of loving yourself and seeing just how incredible you are. Now, if you're sitting there saying, but wait, JG, I thought you said we don't have to develop self-love, but instead just remember it. Why do I have to do anything then? And that's a great question. The way I think about it is like this. I know that when my car is covered in filth and bird poop, that underneath that easily distracting layer of dirt is a beautiful, perfect, shiny vehicle. Remembering that means I don't create any not enoughness or forever unclean stories about my car. And even with that insight, I can still choose to wash my car so that my inner knowing matches the outer appearance of the car. So let's talk about some ways to help preemptively clean the vehicle of the mind when a flock of crows starts dropping bombs on your hood. As a part of my daily journaling practice, I actually have a passage that I wrote to myself some time ago that I read to myself almost like a meditation. It reminds me of the miracle that I am. It reminds me that I choose me and never need anyone else to do that for me. It reminds me of my choice that I get to walk into every interaction with another person or situation in my life knowing all the things I value most about myself. My sense of humor, my heart, my presence, my wit, my wisdom, my kindness, my compassion. It reminds me that I never have to prove those things to anyone because they aren't for anyone else. These are all simply things for me to see and to appreciate and to know. And then I can choose to live and act from that inner knowing. Another element of this journal entry that I reread each morning reminds me of my responsibility to feel fully present in my connection to life, to being alive. I remind myself that anything that enhances my feeling of being fully present to the experience of life, I focus upon and amplify. And even more importantly, anything that diminishes my feeling of being fully present to the experience of life, I choose to be complete with, and I get to release it. I can revisit that insight anytime I feel a lack of self-love or a surge of self-criticism and simply ask myself if attaching to and believing in that self-criticism enhances or diminishes my connection to truly feeling alive. More often than not, sitting in that inquiry for 30 seconds or so can significantly reduce or completely eliminate the self-criticism that I'm experiencing. And the last thing that I do as a part of my daily practice that a friend urged me to do some time ago is to simply write down 5 things I love or am proud of about myself. It's not too hard in the very beginning, but after a few days or a week, I really had to dig deep and get hyper specific. This allows me to take some of the most run-of-the-mill things that occur on a daily basis and find things about myself that I can honor in those seemingly mundane scenarios. Next, we move on to A, which stands for approval. I know for so many years of my life, I walked around in the world as if everyone had some test that I needed to pass. I needed to prove myself to get their approval and validation, and every interaction was a carefully manufactured display of what I thought would get me that approval. It was such a thoughtopilot thing for me. That's what I call it when our thoughts go on autopilot and we start living from conditioning instead of living from intentionality. Whether it's constructing a version of ourselves in order to get a potential romantic partner to see how great we are, or trying to prove how smart we are so a potential client will work with us, we're trying to pass a test that doesn't exist. People don't want you to pass an imaginary test. They just want to feel connected to you. And nothing creates more distance between us and feeling connected to another human being than us forgetting to be human in favor of being a programmed robot who we think can hack genuine connection. You know, we actually can't ever really be approved of or rejected by anyone else. And even if we are, the only thing being approved of or rejected is the image we're displaying and whether or not it aligns with the very subjective and personal preferences of that person, which says nothing about us. When we're seeking this kind of approval, what we're really doing is what I call outsourcing our self-trust. If we really trusted ourselves to know what's best for us, to ask for what we need, to make the tough decisions knowing that we can handle whatever comes our way and that we're resourceful, then needing the approval or validation of others would be redundant because I'd be sourcing from myself what I otherwise think is only available from others. Self-trust is strengthened every time you practice giving to yourself what you think you need to get from others. So many of us want unconditional love and acceptance from our friends, family, and society at large. But the question to ask ourselves is, where am I putting conditions on loving and accepting myself? Where have I decided that very specific conditions need to be met in order for me to be allowed to be happy or fulfilled or to believe that I'm enough? Ask yourself what you wish you would hear from a friend, a family member, a client, or anyone else in your world about who you are, about your work, about your personality, about your character, and then notice where you already are those things and what you might want to work on to be able to genuinely say it about yourself if you don't personally see or feel it yet. While it's great to have as a cherry on top, and there's nothing wrong with feeling happy when others recognize you, the more you're able to approve of you instead of waiting to be approved of, and the more you're able to do that for you to have an inner sense of fulfillment, not to live up to some fabricated standard that you think others have set for you, the more you will love and trust yourself, and the more you will see your interactions with others being filled with more love, connection, and purity. No longer seeking for them to give or say anything more to you than whatever they already are. And finally, the last part of learning to love the crap out of yourself is the P, which stands for permission. You know, it may not seem this way on the surface, but self-love can actually be an act of defiance. What if I don't comply? What if I don't waste my super limited time and energy trying to fit in? In a world where we're taught to live in compliance from an early age, it can feel really edgy to put ourselves first, but that's a big component of self-love. Now, some people may not like when you put yourself first initially because your baseline in the past may have been self-sacrifice or people-pleasing and not setting boundaries to protect your own time and energy. And if they don't respond favorably, that's okay. Outside permission to put yourself first will never come. Sometimes it's forced upon us with a health scare or some equally life-shaking situation, but let's not wait till it gets to that point to take responsibility for our own happiness and to be the source of our own self-love. We're going to have to be okay with the feeling of letting someone down if we really want to experience a deep love for and approval of ourselves. The alternative is that we keep letting ourselves down, and that, over time, will do far more damage than any temporary recalibration that the people in our lives will need to experience as we step more into choosing ourselves first. Plus, it's a powerful example for the people in your world by being a self-reliant, self-sufficient, self-accepting model of unapologetic ownership of your time and energy. Okay, and just one thing to be clear here, unapologetic doesn't mean you don't care about or think about other people's feelings. You always want to act with love and compassion in setting your boundaries, but what changes is that you no longer think that who you are needs rationalization or explaining, or that what you need is somehow self-indulgent, or that it's only reserved for a chosen few who deserve that level of self-prioritization. Another way to really practice giving yourself permission to love yourself is to have some very specific conversations with yourself. This is something else I'll do anytime I want to give to myself what I wish I heard from others, and it's had a profound impact and been very transformational for me. You'll want to do this sitting in front of a mirror or by opening the camera app on your phone and looking at yourself while you speak. One of those convos I like to call the "I would still love you even if" convo. Now, this was one that I remember the very first time I did it, it just occurred to me to do it, is I've had this massive weight loss. And what I noticed was that anytime I got on the scale and I saw that I gained a couple pounds, I would start going through all this worry and all this concern that I was going to gain all my weight back. That made me have no self-love and nothing but self-criticism about myself in those moments. So one day I decided to look in the mirror, look at myself eye to eye and say, "Jason, I would still love you even if you gained back every pound that you lost." The level of love and self-compassion I sent to myself when I looked in my own eyes helped me to not feel the despair and allowed my self-love to resurface immediately in that moment. Another one of these combos is what I call the "I'm so sorry I put you through that" combo. You know, if we treated our friends and family the way we treat ourselves sometimes, we probably would be alone. This conversation is one where I can look in the mirror and I can apologize to myself for the things that I have put myself through. Not from a place of shame or self-judgment, but only from a place of love. I can again look directly in my own eyes and say, "I'm so sorry that I put all this pressure on you. I'm so sorry that I haven't loved you and treated you the way you deserve to be treated." This again allows me to step back and feel real compassion for myself and real self-love in my biggest moments of despair. And the last convo is what I call the "your services are no longer needed here" conversation. This is where I can sit down with a part of me, maybe that I developed in childhood or early adulthood, something that has been here to serve me at some point, but that no longer serves me now. Again, looking directly at myself, I can say to myself and that part of me that's showing up, "Listen, I know you were here to serve me, and you had a good reason for being here, but your services, they're no longer needed. I'm going to take over now. You get to retire, you get to go live the good life, and I'm going to take over with my being and what I know to be true now." This is another beautiful way to lovingly honor and process things that no longer serve you and move forward, returning to self-love. These conversations reinforce your self-reliance, your self-trust, your self-leadership, and your self-love. Try any or all of the conversations for yourself, and I can almost guarantee you'll experience a shift and a return to self-love. A couple of years ago, I sat down and I was interviewed for this story about massive weight loss transformations. They were documenting 1 million pounds lost across all the people whose stories they were gathering. At the end of me telling my story and having this interview, they said, "Great, thank you so much, Jason. It was so great to talk to you. Whenever you get a second, can you send us some of your hero shots?" And I said, "Hero shots?" They go, "Yeah, some pictures." And I said, "Oh, that's amazing. I actually just had a photo shoot 2 weeks ago, and I have all these beautiful pictures that I can send to you." And they said, "Oh, no, sorry. Let me be a little more clear. Your hero shots are not after the weight loss, they're before." I said, "Well, I don't understand. What do you mean?" They said, "Well, the 332-pound version of you, that's the real hero. That's the one that decided something had to change and took action to make that change happen. I want to celebrate you for the hero you are in being here, because you have decided that you want to make a change to return to self-love. And that's the biggest step." See, at the end of the day, self-love is what's left over in the absence of self-criticism. And the absence of self-criticism is what comes in the presence of self-compassion. I hope you've seen today that lovingly questioning and being compassionate towards the stories we sometimes unknowingly attach to that create separation between our self-concept and who we really are is the path to returning to self-love. Because when you have those moments of remembering, those flashes of truth where your self-concept catches up to who you really are, that's when you not only blow your own mind and start absolutely loving the crap out of yourself, but it's also where you can make the biggest difference to the people and the world around you. That's all I've got for you today, fam. If you love this episode, please make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're watching it on, and I'd be honored if you take a minute to give us a 5-star rating and review so that more people have the chance to join our soul fam of ruiners. Screenshot this and post it to your stories. Tag me at the Jason Goldberg so I can show you some love back, and feel free to DM me with any questions or feedback, and let's keep ruining shit together. Love you guys a ton, and I'll see you next time. Peace.